It all started with a single plastic flamingo. I had placed it near my mailbox one morning, bright pink, standing tall and proud. A simple decoration, but with a powerful message. October was Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and like many in the neighborhood, I wanted to show my support. By the end of the week, my yard was a sea of pink flamingos. It wasn't just me, friends, neighbors, and even local businesses joined in. Each flamingo represented a donation toward breast cancer research. The display was cheerful, meaningful, and impossible to miss. And, apparently, deeply offensive to one person. Because the moment Karen Douglas, our HOA dictator in human form, saw the flamingos, she lost her mind. It was a perfect Saturday morning. Birds chirped. Kids rode their bikes. My front yard was a pink paradise. And then, I turned. There she was. Karen, standing on my driveway, arms crossed, lips pursed so tightly they nearly disappeared. I sighed. Morning, Karen. She didn't return the greeting. Instead, she jabbed a printed-out HOA rulebook toward my face. This, she snapped, is a clear violation of community aesthetics. I raised an eyebrow. You mean, the flamingos? Karen sniffed. The HOA guidelines clearly state that decorative ornaments must be in neutral tones. These, she gestured wildly, are hideous. I grinned. They're for charity. Karen blinked. What? I crossed my arms. Every flamingo represents a donation to breast cancer research. It's a fundraiser, Karen. She scoffed. That doesn't excuse it. These things make the neighborhood look cheap. I stared at her. You're telling me, I said slowly, that raising money for cancer research is making the neighborhood look cheap? Karen huffed. That's not what I meant. I folded my arms. Then what did you mean, Karen? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Then, instead of answering, she stormed off. And I already knew. This wasn't over. 3 days later, I received a formal letter from the HOA. Notice of violation. Dear Ms. Carter, your yard decorations are not in compliance with HOA aesthetic regulations. You are required to remove the pink flamingos within 48 hours or face a daily fine of $100. I laughed out loud. Not only was this ridiculous, but Karen had no idea who she was dealing with. Because I wasn't just going to ignore this. I was going to make this fundraiser even bigger. That night, I made a few phone calls. And the next morning, Karen woke up to an absolute nightmare. Because it wasn't just my yard covered in flamingos anymore. It was the entire street. House after house, pink flamingos everywhere. Mailboxes, driveways, even the neighborhood entrance sign. Some neighbors even painted their doors pink. And right in front of the HOA office, a massive banner that read, HOA can't silence charity, support breast cancer awareness. Karen lost her mind. She went door to door, screaming at people to take them down. No one listened. Instead, they started posting about her on social media. And within hours, the story went viral. The next morning, as I was drinking coffee on my porch, a news van pulled up. A reporter stepped out, microphone in hand. Ms. Carter, she asked. I smiled. That's me. We've heard that your HOA is trying to shut down a breast cancer fundraiser. Would you like to comment? I grinned. Oh, I'd love to. Karen? She was watching from her porch. And when she saw the cameras, she ran inside and slammed the door. Too late. Because by noon, the story was on every major news network. Homeowners Association tries to ban cancer awareness display. Local HOA president calls charity an eyesore. Karen versus the Flamingos, a battle for the ages. Karen's name was everywhere. And the best part? The HOA board members were panicking. Because this wasn't just embarrassing, it was a legal nightmare. And Karen? She was about to be punished. That evening, the HOA held an emergency meeting. Karen sat at the front, looking furious. The room was packed, not just with homeowners, but with reporters, city officials, and even local business owners. The HOA president, who looked absolutely exhausted, cleared his throat. Ms. Douglas, he said, due to the overwhelming backlash, we have decided to overturn your complaint. Karen's face turned red. But the regulations. A lawyer stood. Ms. Douglas, this is now a discrimination case. You attempted to fine a homeowner for supporting a medical charity. Karen froze. The lawyer continued. As of today, the HOA will be dropping all fines related to this matter. The room erupted into cheers. And then, the final blow. The HOA president turned to Karen. Due to your behavior, he said, we are removing you from your position effective immediately. Karen's mouth dropped open. You can't do that, she screeched. The president sighed. Actually, we can. He held up a document. Here's your official termination notice. The entire room burst into applause. And just like that, Karen was done. 1 week later, my neighborhood held a block party. The fundraiser had raised over $50,000 for breast cancer research. Karen? She put her house up for sale. No announcement. No goodbye speech. Just gone. And my flamingos? They were still standing. Firefighter Mike grabbed a burger from the grill. You really did it, he said. I grinned. Damn right I did. And as the sun set over my beautiful, pink flamingo-covered lawn, I smiled. Because this time, Karen was never coming back. It had been 2 weeks since Karen was kicked out of the HOA. The neighborhood was finally peaceful. People left their flamingos up in defiance. We had raised over $50,000 for breast cancer research. And Karen? She was avoiding everyone. Her house had a for sale sign in front of it. It was only a matter of time before she was gone for good. Until one morning, I woke up to a horrific sight. Every single pink flamingo in my yard? Gone. Ripped out. Stolen. Vanished. My stomach dropped. Because I already knew who did it. I ran inside and checked my security cameras. And sure enough, there she was. Karen. 2:13 a.m., Karen sneaks onto my property. 2:15 a.m., she yanks the first flamingo out of the ground. 2:20 a.m., she loads them into her car. 2:30 a.m., she speeds off into the night. I gritted my teeth. This wasn't just petty revenge. This was theft. And this time, she wasn't getting away with it. I called the police. Let me get this straight, the officer said. Your ex-HOA president stole dozens of plastic flamingos? Yep. And it was a fundraiser for breast cancer awareness? Yep. The officer chuckled. Oh, she's screwed. That afternoon, 2 police officers knocked on Karen's door. I watched from my porch as she answered. And the moment she saw the cops, her face drained of color. Ms. Douglas, one officer said, we have reason to believe you were involved in the theft of property from your neighbor's yard. Karen laughed nervously. What? No, that's ridiculous. The officer pulled out a tablet and hit play. My security footage appeared on the screen. Clear as day. Karen stealing every single flamingo. Her face twisted in horror. This is harassment, she shrieked. This is a hate crime against HOAs. The officer sighed. Ma'am, he said, you're under arrest for theft and vandalism. Karen screamed. But the moment those handcuffs clicked, the entire neighborhood erupted in cheers. Karen's arrest was all over the local news. Ex-HOA president arrested for stealing cancer charity flamingos. Karen Douglas faces criminal charges after late-night theft. The HOA board tried to distance themselves. But it was too late. Within a week, the remaining board members resigned. And after a unanimous vote, the HOA was officially disbanded. No more petty fines. No more ridiculous rules. No more Karen. Maplewood Estates was finally free. Karen went to court. She tried to plead innocent. She blamed me. She blamed the HOA. She even blamed the flamingos. But the judge? He wasn't buying it. He looked at Karen. Then at the security footage. Then at the list of crimes she had committed over the years. And finally, he slammed his gavel. Miss Douglas, you are sentenced to 500 hours of community service. Karen gasped. Specifically, the judge continued, you will be assisting in local breast cancer charity events. Karen's mouth dropped open. And the final blow? You will also be required to wear a pink flamingo costume at all fundraising events. The courtroom erupted in laughter. Karen's face turned beet red. She tried to argue. But the judge just banged his gavel again. Case closed. Karen had officially lost. Forever. 1 month later, I stood in my yard. Pink flamingos lined every street. We had raised over $100,000 for breast cancer research. And Karen? She was miserably handing out flyers at a fundraiser, dressed as a giant flamingo. I grinned. Because this time, Karen wasn't just gone. She was humiliated. And no one, not the HOA, not the city, not Karen herself, would ever mess with my lawn flamingos again. It had been 1 month since Karen was sentenced to community service. Every weekend, she had to stand in the town square, handing out breast cancer awareness flyers while wearing a giant pink flamingo suit. It was glorious. People laughed. Kids took selfies with her. Even the local news showed up to interview her. Reporter, Ms. Douglas, how does it feel to support such a great cause? Karen, dead inside, I love it. She had no choice but to pretend. But I saw it. The rage in her eyes. She was boiling. And I knew she wasn't done yet. One morning, I woke up to find half the neighborhood's flamingos missing. Not stolen, just gone. Someone had silently removed them overnight. I checked my security cameras. And there, at 2:47 a.m., was a hooded figure creeping around my yard, stealing flamingos. I zoomed in. Saw a familiar scowl. It was Karen. Karen wanted revenge. But I was 2 steps ahead. That night, I set up a special surprise. Red Circle motion-activated sprinklers. Red Circle bright pink paint bombs rigged to the flamingos. Red Circle a hidden camera live streaming everything to Facebook. At 3:12 a.m., Karen returned. She reached for a flamingo. Sweat droplets splash. The sprinklers blasted her in the face. Collision pop. The paint bombs exploded, covering her in neon pink. Video camera live. The entire town watched it unfold in real time. Karen screamed. She tried to run, but slipped in the mud, landing face first in my flower bed. By morning, everyone had seen the video. HOA Karen caught pink-handed stealing flamingos. Former HOA president tries to sabotage charity, instantly regrets it. And the best part? The police showed up at her house before she even woke up. Karen answered the door, still covered in pink paint. The officer sighed. Ms. Douglas, he said, we have you on video committing theft. Again. Karen stammered. I was framed. It was a prank. The officer held up a printed-out screenshot of her from the live stream. Really? He asked. Because this looks exactly like you. Karen squeaked. You're under arrest for vandalism and violating your community service order. As the cuffs clicked around her wrists, I watched from my porch, sipping my coffee, smiling, because this time, Karen was going away for good. Karen stood before the judge again. She looked miserable, covered in faded pink paint. Exhausted, broken, the judge sighed. Ms. Douglas, he said, you were given one last chance to redeem yourself. Instead, you committed theft and vandalism. Karen's lip trembled. The judge shook his head. You are hereby sentenced to 3 months in county jail. Karen gasped. And, the judge added, upon release, you will complete an additional 1,000 hours of community service. Karen's face turned white. Her lawyer looked like he wanted to die. The courtroom erupted into cheers. Karen had officially lost. Forever. Karen was dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs. And the entire town celebrated. Flamingo decorations doubled overnight. People painted their mailboxes pink. Local businesses even created a new drink in her honor. Hot beverage, the Karen Latte, extra bitter, no sugar. And Karen? She was never seen in our town again. When she got out of jail, she sold her house and left. No one knew where she went. No one cared. Because Maplewood Estates was finally free. 1 year later, I sat on my porch. My lawn was still covered in flamingos. Firefighter Mike pulled up. You did it, he said. I flipped a burger. Damn right I did. And as the sun set over my beautiful, flamingo-filled yard, I smiled. Because this time, Karen was never coming back. 3 months passed. Karen was rotting in jail, probably blaming everyone but herself. The neighborhood was thriving. People kept their flamingos up year-round. Businesses cashed in on the story. But the town council? They wanted to make sure this never happened again. So one morning at a town hall meeting, the mayor cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we are proposing a new ordinance, the Karen Douglas Anti-Petty HOA Law." The room erupted in cheers. The law would ban HOAs from fining people for non-issues. No more stupid complaints about mailbox colors. No more ridiculous fines over aesthetic violations. No more power-hungry Karens controlling neighborhoods. And the best part? They named the law after her. Karen Douglas, forever a warning to future HOA tyrants. And when the vote came, it was unanimous. HOAs could never terrorize homeowners again. The Flamingo fiasco had become legendary. Local historians documented everything. The news articles, the viral videos, the security footage of Karen stealing flamingos at 3 a.m. And finally, the town museum unveiled a special exhibit, The Fall of HOA Karen. It featured Flamingo, a life-sized flamingo display, camera with flash, a wall of Karen's most ridiculous complaint letters, video camera, a looping video of her pink paint disaster, and the highlight? A wax figure of Karen herself, frozen in time, mid-scream, covered in pink paint. It was the most visited exhibit of the year. Karen had become a cautionary tale. She was a permanent joke. And there was nothing she could do about it. After 6 months in jail, Karen was finally released. She had nowhere to go. No house, no friends, no HOA to hide behind. And when she tried to move back to town, people booed her at the grocery store. The baristas at the coffee shop refused to serve her. Kids pointed at her and whispered, "Look, it's Flamingo Karen." And then she made the biggest mistake of all. She tried to apply for a new HOA job in another neighborhood. She walked into the interview, smug as ever. The HOA board looked at her resume, then at her name, then at the news articles about her, and they laughed her out of the room. Karen couldn't escape her past. She was blacklisted from every HOA in the country. For the first time in her life, she had no power over anyone. She had to get a normal job. At a craft store, selling pink flamingos. Poetic justice. 1 year later, the town decided to go all out. They launched an annual Flamingo Festival, a massive fundraiser for breast cancer awareness. Live music, food trucks, a flamingo parade, and at the center of it all, a giant, inflatable Karen balloon. Pink, screaming, covered in paint. The town loved it. Tourists came from all over to see where Flamingo Karen had fallen. The festival raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for cancer research. And Karen? She had to watch it all happen. From the checkout counter of a craft store, Karen Douglas was erased from power. But her name lived on as a punchline. Her downfall was taught in law schools as an example of how not to run an HOA. Her face was printed on t-shirts. Her story became a meme. And me? I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the neighborhood thrive. My flamingos were still standing. Firefighter Mike pulled up. "You really did it," he said. I flipped a burger. Damn right I did. And as the sun set over my beautiful, flamingo-covered lawn, I smiled. Because this time, Karen was never coming back. One day, I got a call from a film producer. "Ms. Carter," he said, "we'd like to make a documentary about your town's HOA battle." I grinned. "You mean the downfall of Flamingo Karen?" "Exactly." The production team moved fast. They interviewed me, Firefighter Mike, the police officers who arrested Karen, the judge who sentenced her, random neighbors who just wanted to roast her one more time. They even got security footage of her late-night flamingo theft. And when the documentary premiered, it was a global sensation. Flamingo Karen, the HOA president who lost everything over plastic birds. Millions watched. People mocked her online. Meme pages went wild. And Karen? She couldn't escape it. Her entire identity had been reduced to a pink, feathered failure. 6 months later, Hollywood came knocking. A major studio bought the rights to the story. They cast Meryl Streep as Karen. Ryan Reynolds played firefighter Mike. Jennifer Lawrence played me. And when the trailer dropped, the internet lost its mind. An inspiring true story of one woman's desperate fight to control her neighbors, and the unstoppable flamingos that took her down. Karen tried to sue the studio. The judge laughed her out of court. The movie? It won 2 Oscars. Karen? She got laughed at in grocery stores. The town council wanted to commemorate the battle, so they commissioned a giant bronze statue. And one day, right in the middle of the town square, they unveiled it. A massive pink flamingo, standing on top of a Karen-shaped pedestal. The plaque read, "Never let an HOA Karen rule over you again." Karen? She boycotted the town forever, which was a win for everyone. Karen tried to rebuild her life. She moved to a new state. She changed her name. She dyed her hair. But no matter where she went, people still recognized her. She'd walk into a coffee shop, and the barista would smirk. A flamingo latte for Karen? She tried applying for jobs. Every employer Googled her name. And when they saw her criminal record, her mugshot, and the Oscar-winning movie about her downfall, they laughed her out of the office. Karen couldn't escape. She was a living, breathing cautionary tale. And she would be for the rest of her life. 1 year later, I sat on my porch. My lawn? Still covered in flamingos. The town? Still thriving. Firefighter Mike pulled up. "You know," he said, "I heard Karen tried to move to another town." I smirked. "And?" He grinned. "They already knew about her. Asterisk, asterisk, someone put up flamingos in her new neighborhood the day she arrived. Asterisk, asterisk." I burst out laughing. Because now, no matter where she went, no matter how far she ran, Karen would never escape the flamingos. After months of public humiliation, Karen did the only thing she could. She moved to another town. A place where no one would recognize her. A place where she could start over. She found a quiet little suburb in Florida. She bought a new house. And for the first time in years, she thought she was safe. But Karen didn't realize one thing. The internet never forgets. One morning, as Karen stepped outside to grab her newspaper, she froze. Because right there, in the middle of her brand new front yard, was a single pink plastic flamingo. Karen's hands started shaking. She yanked it out of the ground and looked around. Who put this here? Her new neighbors? A prank? Coincidence? Then she saw the note attached to the flamingo's leg. It had one word. "We know." Karen screamed. Because now, she realized the truth. She could never escape. Karen tried to ignore it. She threw the flamingo in the trash. But the next morning, there were 2. By the end of the week, there were 10. No matter where she went, flamingos followed her. She'd go to the grocery store, flamingo decorations in the aisles. She'd go to a restaurant, waiters served her drinks in flamingo-themed cups. She'd turn on the news and see a segment about the legend of Flamingo Karen. And the worst part? People recognized her. Tourists pointed. Kids whispered. At one point, she heard a teenage girl gasp. "Oh my God, it's her." Karen ran out of the store. She couldn't take it. She had become an urban legend. And no matter what she did, the world would never let her forget. Karen was losing her mind. She called the police. "Someone is stalking me," she cried. The officer sighed. "Ma'am, are you saying people are leaving plastic flamingos near your home?" "Yes." The officer sighed again. "That's not a crime." Karen screamed in frustration. Even the police didn't take her seriously. She checked security footage from her doorbell camera. And what she saw made her blood run cold. At 3 a.m., a group of people in pink hoodies crept onto her lawn and planted dozens of flamingos. The next night, more. By the third night, Karen had a full-blown pink flamingo army outside her house. This wasn't just a prank anymore. This was organized. Karen gasped. Had the flamingo cult followed her? Karen tried to fight back. She ripped the flamingos out. She threw them into the street. She yelled at her new neighbors. And finally, she left a note on her front door. "Whoever is doing this, stop. I am not Flamingo Karen." The next morning, a response appeared. taped to her mailbox. Yes, you are. And we will never stop. Underneath? A photo of her mugshot. Karen dropped the paper. She realized something horrifying. This wasn't just revenge. This was a movement. And it wasn't going away. Ever. The group called themselves the Flamingo Society, a global network of people dedicated to trolling Karens everywhere. They had Flamingo planting squads in every state. Flamingo, a website tracking Karen's latest location. Flamingo merch that said, RIP Flamingo Karen in bright pink. Karen's worst nightmare had become reality. She had created a monster. And now? It was too late to stop it. Karen tried one last time to disappear. She bought a tiny cabin in the mountains. No internet. No neighbors. No flamingos. She thought she was finally free. Then one morning, she stepped outside and froze. Because standing in the middle of the forest, in a perfect circle, were 500 pink flamingos. Karen collapsed to her knees. She had lost. Completely. Utterly. Forever. Karen was never heard from again. Some say she moved to a remote island. Others say she changed her name and lives in hiding. But no matter where she went, flamingos always found her. And me? I sat in my backyard sipping coffee, flipping burgers. My lawn was still covered in flamingos. Firefighter Mike pulled up. You hear the latest? He asked, grinning. I smirked. What now? Somebody painted a giant flamingo mural on Karen's old house. I laughed so hard I almost fell out of my chair. Because this time, Karen wasn't just gone. She was eternal. Forever a legend. Forever a joke. And forever hunted by flamingos. One day, I got a call from a billionaire investor. Ms. Carter, he said, your town's battle against Flamingo Karen is legendary. We want to create a cryptocurrency in its honor. I nearly spit out my coffee. Eh, what? He continued. We're launching a new coin, Flamingo Coin. I blinked. You're serious? As serious as Karen's criminal record. Within weeks, Flamingo Coin was live. And somehow, it took off. Suddenly, people were buying and trading Flamingo Coin. Businesses accepted it. It made national news. Flamingo Coin, the cryptocurrency born from HOA revenge. Karen? She saw it on TV. And she screamed into the void. Because now, her legacy was printed on digital currency. With Flamingo Coin booming, the state governor made an announcement. Starting next year, we will officially recognize October 13th as Flamingo Freedom Day. Karen's jaw hit the floor. A state holiday, dedicated to her downfall. Every year on October 13th, Flamingo people put extra flamingos in their yards. Flamingo towns held flamingo parades. Flamingo schools taught the legend of Flamingo Karen in history classes. Karen tried to file a lawsuit against the governor. The judge laughed her out of court. She had no way out. The world was never letting this go. Karen thought she could escape. She sold her tiny mountain cabin and moved to an old house in the desert. Middle of nowhere. No neighbors. No pink. For the first time in years, she felt safe. Then one night, as she lay in bed, she heard a soft rustling. Like plastic. Her breath caught. Slowly, she sat up, looked across the dark room. And then, lightning flashed outside. For half a second, the window lit up. And in the reflection, she saw them. Flamingos. Hundreds of them. Standing outside her house. Perfectly still. Perfectly silent. Karen screamed. And by morning, she was gone. Vanished. With Karen missing, people began whispering. Had she fled the country? Had she changed her name? Had she been taken by the flamingos? No one knew. But soon, a group of people in pink robes started appearing. They called themselves the Order of the Flamingo. Their mission? To make sure Karen was never forgotten. They held annual rituals in front of her old house. They planted plastic flamingos at every HOA office in the country. And their final vow? Until Karen is found, we shall never stop. The hunt for Flamingo Karen had begun. And she would never know peace again. With Karen gone, people kept the tradition alive. And soon, the federal government stepped in. Congress passed the Flamingo Protection Act. It included Flamingo permanent HOA restrictions against banning flamingos. Flamingo, a federal fund for flamingo-themed breast cancer awareness campaigns. Flamingo, a national law ensuring that Karen's mugshot remained public record. Forever, Karen tried to disappear. But no matter where she went, the law itself made sure she could never hide. Years passed. Karen became a myth. Some say she fled to a remote island. Others say she lives under an assumed name, always looking over her shoulder. But no matter where she went, one thing remained constant. Every year, on October 13th, a single pink flamingo would appear at her doorstep. No one knew who put it there. No one knew how they found her. But Karen? She knew exactly what it meant. She would never escape. Not from the flamingos. Not from her past. And certainly not from us. Decades later, I sat on my porch. A new generation had taken over the Flamingo Festival. Kids wore pink shirts that said, "Never forget Karen." Firefighter Mike, now retired and enjoying life, leaned back in his chair. "You ever wonder if Karen's still out there?" he asked. I smirked. "Does it matter?" He chuckled. "Nope, because Karen wasn't just a person anymore. She was a warning. A lesson to every HOA tyrant who dared to rise again." And as the sun set over my flamingo-covered yard, I smiled. Because this time, Karen wasn't just gone. She was eternal. A ghost. A legend. A joke that would never die. It had been decades since Karen disappeared. Most people believed she was dead. But the Flamingo Society? They knew better. They had spent years tracking her movements. Every time she changed her name, they found her. Every time she moved to a new town, flamingos appeared on her lawn. She had tried everything to escape. Plastic surgery. Moving to a country without HOAs. Living off-grid in the woods. But no matter where she went, she always woke up to a single pink flamingo staring at her window. And now, the Flamingo Society had one final mission. A worldwide hunt for Karen. To end this once and for all, the Flamingo Society launched a global campaign. Find Flamingo Karen. They put her face on billboards. They spread her mugshot on social media. They created an app where people could report Karen sightings. The world turned against her. People traveled the globe, planting flamingos in random places, just in case. Even astronauts on the International Space Station took part. They dropped a pink flamingo decal onto a satellite. Karen was officially wanted across the cosmos. She had nowhere left to hide. Karen fled reality itself. Desperate to escape, she found a secret group of scientists working on multiversal travel. She bribed her way in. And one day, in a secret underground lab, she stepped into a dimensional portal, vanished, and landed in a parallel universe. She gasped in relief. Finally, she was free. She could start over. She could live a life without flamingos. Then she turned and saw the sign. "Welcome to Flamingo Earth." Her scream shattered the sky. She had escaped her own reality, only to land in a world ruled by flamingos. Everything was pink. The trees, the roads, even the sky. Instead of dogs, people walked giant flamingos on leashes. Instead of cars, there were flamingo-shaped hovercrafts. Karen looked up at a massive golden statue in the town square. Her own face, carved in stone. The plaque read, "Flamingo Karen, the one who suffered for our glory." A group of people in pink robes surrounded her. "You've returned," one of them whispered. Karen backed away. What is this?" They bowed. "You're the chosen one. The eternal bringer of flamingos. The martyr of HOA tyranny." Karen screamed. She had not escaped. She had been summoned. In this world, Karen was a deity. A tragic figure worshipped by billions. Every year, they reenacted her greatest failures. Actors played her arrests, her lawsuits, and her downfall. A massive hologram of her crying in court was projected onto the moon. Karen tried to fight back. She screamed, "I hate flamingos." But in Flamingo Earth, that phrase was sacred. It was the national motto. They printed it on their currency. The children recited it in school. And Karen? She had no choice but to accept her fate. She was no longer just a Karen. She was the Flamingo Queen. And she could never leave. Years passed. Karen ruled from a golden palace, surrounded by flamingo servants. Every morning, she was forced to participate in the national parade. Thousands of people lined the streets to chant, "Hail Flamingo Karen." She had to smile and wave. She had to watch plays about her downfall. She had to eat flamingo-shaped food every day. And no matter what she did, she could never escape. Because the laws of this universe were absolute. Flamingo Karen was forever. Back in my universe, I sat on my porch, sipping my coffee, flipping burgers. Firefighter Mike pulled up. "You ever wonder where Karen went?" he asked. I smirked. "Does it matter?" He grinned. "Nah, because no matter where she was, we knew. Somewhere, in some dimension, Karen was surrounded by flamingos. And she always would be. For all eternity. Karen had been the Flamingo Queen for centuries. She had ruled. She had suffered. And she had finally accepted her fate. But one day, as she sat in her throne of plastic flamingos, a crack formed in the pink sky. A voice deep, ancient, terrifying whispered, "It's time to begin again." Karen's eyes widened. "No, no. I paid for my crimes. I suffered. I ruled this flamingo nightmare for thousands of years." The voice chuckled. "And now, you get to do it all over again," Karen screamed. And then, the universe reset. She woke up in her old house, back in Maplewood Estates. It was as if nothing had ever happened. The HOA was still there. The neighborhood was still standing. And she was just Karen again. She gasped. "I'm free." She ran to the mirror. No wrinkles. No flamingo tattoos burned into her skin. She was back to the beginning. She could start over. She could rebuild her empire. And then, she stepped outside and saw the first flamingo, sitting on her lawn, staring at her, mocking her. Her breath hitched. "No," she whispered. But then the second flamingo appeared. Then a third. Then an entire army of pink birds flooded the streets. And she realized she was trapped in a time loop. And no matter what she did, it would always end in flamingos. Fire Day 1. Karen tries to ignore the flamingos. They multiply. Fire Day 5. Karen calls animal control. They refuse to intervene. Fire Day 7. Karen tries to remove them herself. They scream at her. Fire Day 10. Karen flees the neighborhood. The flamingos follow. Fire Day 30. Karen burns down her house. The flamingos rise from the ashes. Fire Day 365. Karen gives up. The sky turns pink. The loop resets. And then, she wakes up. Back on day 1. Again. And again. And again. Every time the loop reset, she tried a different path. She moved to a new state. Flamingos were already there. She became a nun. Flamingo statues surrounded the convent. She fled into space. The flamingos were waiting on Mars. She tried to become a pirate. Flamingo-shaped ships attacked her fleet. No matter what she did, the flamingo curse always found her. And every time she failed, the loop reset. And she was back in Maplewood Estates. Day 1. Again. And the worst part? She could never escape. Because deep down, she deserved it. Millions of loops later, Karen sat on her porch. Broken, defeated. She had tried everything. But she finally understood. This was her fate. This was justice. The universe had decided. Karen Mitchell would never be free. A single pink flamingo waddled up to her. It tilted its head, as if to say, "You get it now, don't you?" Karen let out a weak laugh. "I do," she whispered. She closed her eyes and let the flamingos take her. And as the universe reset one last time, the curse continued. Forever. Because Karen's punishment never ends. Centuries later, people still whispered the tale. The story of a woman who tried to control a neighborhood and was cursed to suffer eternally. Some say you can still hear her screams on the wind. Some say that every time a Karen abuses her power, a new flamingo appears, And if you ever see a Karen running in fear from a plastic bird, you'll know. The curse is still alive. And it always will be. It had been months since Karen Mitchell was officially stripped of her power. Fire, the HOA was dissolved. Fire, the fraudulent fines were erased. Fire, the neighborhood was free. But even after she was kicked out, humiliated, and forced to pay thousands in legal fees, Karen had one last trick up her sleeve. Because Karen? She didn't just accept defeat. She plotted revenge. And this time, she went too far. One morning, I woke up to a horrifying sight. My entire front yard, covered in cement. My flower beds? Gone. My grass? Buried under solid concrete. Even my driveway had been sloppily extended to cover my entire lawn. Lisa ran over, staring in shock. What, the actual hell? Then, on my porch, I saw it. A printed letter, signed by Karen Mitchell. Consider this my final contribution to Maplewood Estates. Now your ugly, unregulated property is at least uniform with the rest of the community. You're welcome. Lisa's jaw dropped. She paved over your entire yard? I clenched my fists. Oh, I said, grinning. She just made the biggest mistake of her life. Because if Karen thought she was going to get away with this, she had another thing coming. I called the police. Then I called the city inspector. Then I called every lawyer I had ever spoken to. By the time Karen got home that afternoon, the authorities were waiting for her. She barely stepped out of her car before Officer Daniels, the same cop who had warned her 100 times before, walked up and said, Karen Mitchell, you're under arrest for trespassing, property destruction, and vandalism. Karen's smug expression shattered. What? This is a misunderstanding. I was just improving the neighborhood. Lisa crossed her arms. By paving over someone else's lawn? The city inspector shook his head. This is an illegal modification. You destroyed private property. Karen turned to the officers, growing desperate. But it was for the good of the community. Officer Daniel sighed. Karen, you're not part of the community. You were banned. Then click. The sound of handcuffs locking. Karen screeched. You can't do this. You can't. But she was already being shoved into the police car. The neighborhood cheered. And I just smiled. Because this was justice. Karen's trial was a spectacle. Fire, the judge ripped her apart. Fire, her excuses were laughed out of the courtroom. Fire, the city demanded full restitution. In the end, Karen was found guilty of multiple offenses including fire, felony property damage, fire, criminal trespassing, fire, defying a restraining order. The sentence? 1 year in jail. And a court-ordered demand to pay for the complete restoration of my yard. When the verdict was announced, Karen collapsed in her seat. She had spent years trying to control this neighborhood. And now? She was going to jail for it. I leaned over and whispered. Looks like you finally have a place with strict rules, Karen. She glared at me, but she had no power left. Because Karen Mitchell was officially finished. 1 year later, the neighborhood was thriving. Fire, no more HOA. Fire, no more pointless violations. Fire, no more Karen. Lisa, Mark, and I sat in my fully restored front yard. Lisa sipped her coffee. Do you think she's learned her lesson? I smirked. She spent a year in a cell where she had zero control. Trust me, she's miserable. Mark laughed. Where is she now? I leaned back. Oh, she got out, but she's not allowed in any HOA-run neighborhood. Lisa's jaw dropped. Wait, so she can never be a part of an HOA again? I grinned. She's banned for life. Mark whistled. That's worse than jail for her. And it was. Because without an HOA to rule over, Karen had nothing left. And that was the perfect punishment.